Hello everyone. This lecture is going to be a briefing discussion of our Assessment 1 Street Observations project. So the kind of broad goal of the street observations is to explore, map and analyse specific patterns of community-led or bottom-up street life in 2 neighbourhood case study locations. Assessment 1A will be following this process in Neighbourhood 1, and that will be either in Sydney or in Phnom Penh. And then Assessment 1B will be following the same street observations process all together in Phnom Penh. So what this assessment asks you to do is to find a focus area within the broad study of street life. So you will notice all sorts of things on the street and in your neighbourhood case studies. You need to be very specific in saying, well, of all of that stuff that I'm hearing and I'm seeing and I'm sensing and I'm reading, my particular focus is going to be on this aspect or on that aspect. That's what you'll focus on in this assessment, and that might be different in Assessment 1A to what it is in 1B, or it might be the same. What you'll do to focus your street life study is to use a range of ethnographic methodologies. You'll be using observation, looking and counting. You'll be using community engagement, so community mapping, listening, co-mapping, and doing that in teams. And then you'll be supporting both of those ethnographic techniques with desktop investigation and analysis to kind of broaden, contextualize, and deepen your understanding. To help you focus your study and communicate the focus of your study, we suggest that you all give your street life study a name or a title. And so that title can be generated by thinking through what you are noticing. For example, I notice many diverse street users in the case study that I'm looking at. How can streets be inclusive? So if we unpack that sentence for a second, I notice many diverse street users. If you wanted to title your study with a theme over here, your theme might be diversity of street users. So we know, we read that and we say, okay, this person is looking at who is on the street and how there's a range of different street users. If you want to take that one step further, you might like to turn that theme into a research question. So if you're looking at diverse street users, then perhaps what you're looking at is how can streets be inclusive? So how can the spatial aspects of streets create a socially inclusive environment? So we don't mind which angle you take. We do want you to title your street life study with either a thematic title or a research question. And then what you'll do is present these mixed methods of research focused on your particular street life study. So you'll have 3 different research methods: observation, desktop analysis, and community mapping. And each of those lead to an output. So observation will largely lead to a page of drawings. Your community mapping will lead to your community map, which most of you now have. And then you'll bring those 2 things together and deepen and contextualize them through your data page, which has a number of elements that we'll talk through now. So if we start with the first one, the drawings page. The goal of the drawings page is to demonstrate a series of drawings that show your comparison of street life across a number of different sites at a number of different times. So you're showing field-based observation. You might be comparing sites that are similar to find a pattern. You might be comparing sites that are different, again to find a pattern or demonstrate a pattern. You might find that your study needs to actually be lots and lots of different sites, say 6 or 9 different sites, and that time doesn't make such a difference. That's okay. You might find that your study is better demonstrated through this example here, 3 sites looked at 2 different times. So when we drill down into those drawings in a little bit more detail, there's a number of aspects we want to guide you through. The first is consistency. So if the goal here is to show patterns of street life and to ultimately find lessons for great community-led streets, we need to have some consistency so that we focus just on that pattern. So you might decide to draw just in plan. So if we go back to that A4 page of drawings, all of your drawings would be in plan so that you can highlight the differences. You might decide to draw only in elevation if you are focusing, for example, on modifications made to the elevation. In that case, all drawings should be elevation. You might decide to show threshold-based street life. So what happens between the public and the private, or the outside and the inside, or across the depth of the footpath. Again, in that case, you would show only section drawings. You might decide to focus in and just look at doorways, or just look at benches, or just look at one particular aspect of the street. And that is often very well represented through a sketch or a perspective drawing. Again, if that is your approach, then just repeat that drawing approach across all of your studies. Now, you might also find that it's helpful to use a combination of these. If you're using a combination, make sure you repeat that same combination across all of your sites and times. I think the other thing that's important to look at here and to talk about is scale. So you don't have to draw or represent or print at a particular scale. However, what's important to focus on is that you're drawing in a proportionate manner, and that sometimes that can be helped by drawing at roughly 1 to 100. So every 1 centimetre equals 1 metre in real life. And the grid that you've got in your course outline can help you to practice drawing in that manner. What you'll find when you scan your drawings in is that you might then need to enlarge or shrink your drawings in order to fit all of those studies on the page. That's fine. As long as they've been drawn in a proportionate manner, then we don't mind if they're 1 to 57 or 1 to 221. The final thing to note here is the level of detail. So these are not broad macro scale drawings. As you can see here, we're really drawing at a human or animal or object or furniture scale. We can see the edges of buildings, we can see the thicknesses of buildings, we can see doorways and thresholds, we can see the edge of the curb, we can see trees, but we can also see here signage, lighting, furniture, loose objects, umbrellas, pieces of clothing, vehicles, motorbikes versus cars. So we don't really want you to be using symbols to represent those. We want you to be drawing those as if you're furnishing a street. And that's where we come back to that idea of our studies being very much about the human scale of the street, the animal scale of the street, and looking at the street as a room rather than as this big urban void. And here is just an example of what not drawing in a proportionate manner is. So we want to make sure that you're sort of getting the rough relationship right between length and width of your buildings and of all of those elements. The next aspect to talk about is the clarity of your drawing. So remember, these are not drawings that you're submitting to a builder to be priced or to be built. These are drawings which are for the purposes of generating community discussion. So you would need to expect that they are going to be read by people who are not designers. So they need to be simple and clear. You'll be doing your hand drawings, scanning them in, and then editing them in Photoshop and laying them out in InDesign. So let's just recap on some drawing principles that Richard Briggs introduced to make sure that our drawings are to scale and proportionate, as we've talked about, but also clear and legible in other ways. So remember, breaking what you see down into simple shapes can really help to start to formulate your drawing. You don't have to draw everything. We're not creating photoreal depictions of the street. We're actually kind of undertaking focused drawings that tells a particular story of street life patterns, not every story. As we were talking about earlier, how do we draw in a proportionate manner? Not necessarily to a particular scale, but in a proportionate manner. One trick for that is to draw with a grid underneath your page and to really practice just drawing, okay, 1 centimetre equals 1 metre in real life, and starting to look at the world in terms of 1 metre blocks and then draw in 1 centimetre blocks. And then finally, line weights. If we're trying to show a reasonable amount of detail in these drawings, as we were talking about, figures and landscape and benches and clotheslines and hanging washing, etc., then we need to make sure we're using a pen weight that's not so thick that it's going to blur all of those details. So we're not just handing in our sketchbooks, right? We're going to be hand drawing on the field as a way to see and to analyse and to represent. We then scan in those drawings and we use post-production or digital editing to highlight your particular street life focus. So remember, our drawings can't tell every story of street life, and they can't actually even tell every story of your particular focus. So you want to use colour, symbols, or a legend, to really make explicit what your focus is. So if we have a look at this example here, we can see the title is movement demographics. So who is moving on the street, who is stopping on the street. We have a legend here. So the focus is on the who or the what. So what or who is moving on the streets. We've got blue is pedestrians and pink is transport. We're looking at the drawing here, so it's a corner. And we can see that pedestrians are on the kind of inner rim of the drawing, and we've got transport that's on the road, but we've also in Phnom Penh got transport that comes up, parks on and drives on the actual sidewalk. So we're starting to see a relationship here and a focus here through the use not just of the drawing, but of colour, a clear legend and a clear title. That's what we're looking for in the editing of your drawings. Let's move on then to the community mapping aspect. So you do not need to redo or neaten up your community map. The goal of the community map is actually to capture voices from the ground. It's to capture a work in progress that could be added to over many days, months, years. And so your goal here is really to use the map as a tool to facilitate those voices and those conversations with a minimum of 10 interviews. So what you'll do is you'll be pinning up your A4 drawing page, you'll be pinning up your A4 data page, and you'll be pinning up as a group your A1 community map. So let's move on then to the data page. The data page is really where your learnings from your drawings and from your community map come together and synthesize and are supported by quantitative data collection and more tangible representation through photo and infographic. So we want to here use this page to bring your findings together. Let's talk through each of the aspects of your data page, your A4 data page. So you may ask, we're doing drawings, why do we need photos as well? What we're trying to do here is paint as rich a picture possible of street life and of your particular street life pattern that you're focusing on. And so our photos are not the primary element, but they're there to actually support your drawings and to give stories or information about your street life focus that are not captured in your drawing. So we can see in the example here that our drawing offers the broad picture. You know, we see a large portion of the ground floor of the site as well as the telegraph pole in the front, and the focus here is on signage and posters, sort of bottom-up posters and signage. Our photos here then take a much more micro view, and they give us the detail, and they also give us colour and texture, which we don't see as much in the drawing. So you can see how those two visual tools actually work together very well without repeating the information. So we've talked about the drawing, now the infographic. So the goal of an infographic, and I'll talk about what an infographic is, but the goal of an infographic is to show quantitative patterns that support your drawings. They're not they don't replace your drawings. They're not more primary than your drawings. They're supporting your drawings. Your drawings are arguably qualitative data, telling qualitative data. Your infographic is telling quantitative stories, so numerical stories. And let's just think about, first of all, what an infographic is. So if we look at this excuse me, definition here, and this is just a Wikipedia definition, an infographic is a graphic representation of information, data, or knowledge intended to present this information quickly and clearly. An infographic is a form of data visualization. An infographic allows us to see trends or patterns, as we're talking about, and outliers, so things that lie outside of the patterns. So you can see here that we're using the drawings and the legend and the post-production to show patterns. We're using the community map to show patterns, and we're using the infographic to show patterns. So this is all really about highlighting, finding, and communicating patterns as a way to better understand place, and in this case, streets. So your infographic will be generated directly from the tallying or the counting or the data collection that you've been doing in your sketchbook. So your sketchbooks might look something like this. You've been looking at movement, for example. You're counting, in this example here, who's moving up, who's moving down, and who are they? And so this will be translated, this raw data will be translated using digital editing, again to highlight a pattern. So you can see here that some raw data has been, the sketches have been scanned in, titles have been added, so what do people do on a particular site, colour has been used, and kind of a pie graph has been used to show the 3 sites and the different types of activities that occur on those 3 sites, with numerical data supporting. So what does a really great infographic look like? A great infographic has an immediacy of message, you know, and some might call that an aha moment. So it allows you to take a quick look and quickly understand a particular pattern or a piece of information. So I'm showing you here students' work from past years. So these are not experts who are creating, you know, COVID data graphics or infographics. These are students who often have never heard of an infographic. So if we have a look at this example here, we have time. up the left-hand side. We have activities down the bottom. And the title of this was direct activities versus indirect activities. And so the focus was on a particular seating element, and this student asked whether people were directly engaging with that seating element or indirectly, so kind of hovering around it but not touching it. And so we've got, sitting, standing, walking, sitting on it, using your phone, listening to music, etc., etc., etc. So immediately I see that largely the interaction with this object happens in the evening around 5:30, and it is largely indirect. And that's supported by this bar graph here that says 30% of activity is direct and 70% is indirect. Now, without me drilling down into all those details and spending 20 minutes trying to figure this out, I quickly get that message. So that's what we're aiming for with your infographics. So what that means is that you have to really filter out a lot of information and make a clear decision about 2, maximum 3 elements to focus on within your street life focus. You're not going to be able to tell every story or every pattern. And so a way to break that down and to start the way of thinking through an infographic is to go back to your high school lessons and think about an x-axis on the horizontal here and a y-axis on the vertical. And often it can be helpful to start, and it's kind of simple to start by saying, well, your x-axis is going to be what or why, right? So the what might be typologies of sites. I have a retail store, I have an institution, I have a school. It could be objects. I'm looking at a council planned bench. I'm looking at a user-driven seat. I'm looking at sitting on a ledge. It could be activities, sitting, walking, standing, talking, eating, etc. It could be different demographics of users. It could be different times. It could be drivers of street modifications if you go for Y. And you will be comparing that with a numerical piece of information. So how many? That could be quantity, it could be frequency, how often, it could be time, when. So think about the X as like the what and the Y as the how many or the number. Mouse issues here. And so how does that play out? Let's have a look at an example here. So if we look at the X, right, so the what, we're looking at some activities, walking past versus stopping. The Y is the number of people who are doing this between 9 and 12 p.m. So we have our numbers up the side here. We can immediately see that more people are walking past than stopping. Do we care really how many? Not particularly, but the main message is that most people are walking past and they're not stopping. And then we can gather we can make hypotheses or draw conclusions from that. So in this course, in any infographic that you create, there are hundreds of different visual approaches, and this will be more familiar to all of you as designers. What can be helpful is to limit this a little bit in the course to diagrams or infographics that show quantity. See here, diagrams or infographics that show time, things changing over time, changing in terms of quantity, or bringing those together, so a comparison focus. If you're stuck on where to begin, XY axis, or go to datavizproject.com. That is an amazing website that really graphically communicates a range of different data visualization techniques, infographic techniques, and why you would use them. So we've talked about the photo. We've talked about the infographic. The third aspect of the data page is the context ecosystem. The goal of the context ecosystem is to describe why the street life pattern that you have noticed might be happening. And so what you are doing here is creating a visual ecosystem diagram that looks at the factors that might be influencing the patterns of street life you've studied. So we're trying not to make assumptions about what we see. We see what we see, but we need to then go, well, why is that happening? Or why is that person stopping there, without guessing? So how do we do that? We need to be using here our desktop research, so some of the videos that you've been shown, some of the texts that you've been reading, as well as notes from community engagement. So often when you interview community members, they will tell you, well, the reason that street vendors stop here is because every other place is controlled by the police, or there's a relationship between the shop owner and the street vendor, which isn't formal, but which is an informal relationship, and that supports both users, and that also has a positive effect on the street. Your desktop research might say, well, really great lived streets promote this. And you might say, well, oh, I've noticed that in the neighbourhood case study that I've been looking at. So I'm going to draw on that, and I'm going to use that to explain why what I am seeing is happening. So that's where we're drawing information, desktop research and community engagement. You can use quotes or paraphrase or put key themes. And what it will look like is an ecosystem diagram. So often these are used to communicate and analyze what they call wicked or complex problems that involve lots of different people, lots of different events that sort of have a knock-on effect, and they interrelate. So what we're trying to do here is say, okay, we've noticed this street life study. We need to unpack why that might be happening, how that might be happening, in a diagram that shows holistic, interconnected relationships. So we can see here as an example, poverty. Now this is a more deficit-based approach, but poverty is in the middle. If we take a step back, poverty is caused by job loss. Job loss is caused by, let's see here, robot labour. Robot labour is caused by profit maximisation. Profit maximisation is caused by excessive CEO pay. Excessive CEO pay can be caused by inherited wealth. Inherited wealth can be caused by investments in destructive industries. Okay, so again, this is a kind of negative deficit-based approach, but there's some truth in it. And you can see that there are many possible routes that can be taken. This is not just a linear kind of linear diagram. It's rhizomatic. And so that's what we want you to be doing in your ecosystem diagrams of street life. So the focus here is poverty. The focus for you is street life patterns. So again, we're looking at the dynamics or the factors that are influencing the street life pattern you have noticed. So what you can use are the headings that we have here and in the course outline to start to guide you or to prompt you. So you might be looking at cultural factors that are driving why things are the way they are. Social factors, friendship networks, physical factors, political factors. What are the legalities of the sidewalk or the street or the facade? Economic factors. Are there economic drivers that are causing the social or that are partly driving the social interactions that are happening as a result of the commercial activity, and how do those two relate? So you can pull out each of these headings, and there will be more. There may be more, there may be less. And under each, just write some short notes or keywords. What are the cultural factors that are driving this? And have you read that in one of the texts that we've given you? Have those cultural factors come from a discussion that you had with a community member? So cultural factors, social factors, physical factors, economic factors, political factors, environmental factors, etc., with a few short notes underneath each, including references from your desktop research and community engagement. And then finally, your conclusion. So this is where it all comes together. This is where you're really summarizing what you have seen and so what. You know, why does this matter? What are we actually doing this for as a bunch of design students? So we want you in about, 150 to 250 words loosely to tell us, what pattern of street life have you studied? In short terms, it can be very narrative or it might be short dot points, we don't mind. It doesn't have to be essay style. What pattern of street life have you studied? One. What impact does this have on street users? Does it positively impact them, and how? Does it create, incidental social interactions? Does it promote culture? Does it create belonging? Does it create a place of care, etc., etc.? Go back here to those Jeff Howe principles. And then thirdly, so what? What lessons or principles can be learned about great lived or living community-driven streets? What are we actually learning here? So I've been saying to some of our students, if City Hall or Council employed you and said, all right, we really want to create great streets for the people that live here and for our community, our micro and macro community, what do we need to do? You guys are architects, what do we need to do socially and spatially? And how do those two things interact? That's what we're trying to get you to do in the conclusion. Your context ecosystem gives us the why, the background. Your conclusion just summates what pattern you've studied, what impacts that this pattern has on street users, and what lessons or principles can we draw from that about great lived or living streets. So when we're thinking about the impact of these patterns of street life on street users, and also on the lessons that we might draw from the studies that we're doing, it can be really helpful to go back to those principles that we went through in the Lecture 1 series of this course, which looked at what makes great lived streets. So if we go back to Jeff Howe, he talks about, remember, the fundamentals of thermal comfort, safety and accessibility, and then more broadly ideas of open-ended streets, co-generated streets, streets that allow visibility for social struggle, streets that allow social encounter, streets that are spaces where we can care for one another and for more than human life, and streets as places to belong. Jan Gehl frames this in a slightly different way, and I wanted to share this with you all. So he talks about 12 steps to a great public space. Similar, but perhaps more tangible, and that might work for some of you, and the Jeff Howe approach, the more open approach of Jeff Howe, might suit others of you. So Jan Gehl talks about protection from traffic and from crime and from the elements. He talks about places to walk, to stop, to stand, to sit, and to see. That's kind of the open-ended side, I would say, as well as those fundamentals. He talks about places that have opportunities for conversation, and that's encounter, opportunities for play, streets that are human scale. And we've talked a lot about that today in the way that we draw, but that really talks to what we believe good streets are, is that they bring the street down to a human or animal scale, or kind of furniture scale, so that the streets feel more like a room. Sorry, my screen just froze for a second. And then finally, he talks about opportunities to enjoy good weather and aesthetic quality. Aesthetic quality is a tricky one because it's rather subjective, but it's good just to understand where different urbanists and social scientists and designers, where and how they come at what they believe and what their research tells them makes great public space. So we've got all of these facets that we've talked about, methods, and ways of showing those. Very tangibly, let's go through the outputs for the assessment. So first of all, we have 2 A4 pages for your drawings and for your data. There is an InDesign template available on Miro that you should all download, which you can use to lay out your drawings, and you'll see the template looks something like this here. So the orange notes won't print. They're just there as kind of instructional guides to remind you about what to include. There are templates there with fonts for the title, for your name, and placeholders to place your drawings onto. If you would like to use the template, great. If you want to change it and make it your own, that is totally fine. The only thing we ask is that you stick to A4 and you print on minimum 200 GSM paper, so fairly thick paper, because we need to be able to travel with these and pin them up for the exhibition. Your A1 community map, you don't have to do anything to. We will be submitting and pinning up the original as part of the exhibition and as part of your presentations. And then the final component is a series of postcards that we're each going to create to give back to our community partners who have generously offered their time for all of the great community mapping and interviewing that you each have been doing. So this is really part of best practice in this kind of community engagement or participative modes of practice that work in design and in a number of fields. We often call it reporting back or participating in a feedback loop. And quite simply, it is letting people know this is what we've studied. You're a part of this. You have driven this. And so we're reporting back to let you know what's going on and to ask you whether you'd like to be involved or whether you'd like to lead, ideally, the next phase. It's also a gesture of thanks. So what we want each of you to do, and we have a template for this, is download the postcard template on Miro. It is an A4 template and we're going to cut it into 4 A6 postcards. We want you to choose your favourite drawing and put that onto the postcard, and then we will give those postcards out to our community members. So the postcard template looks like this. One side will have 4 red boxes where you can put your image. The red boxes you can just delete when you're done with them. And then the other side has the RUFA and UNSW logos. It says Street Life Studies. If you'd like to add some text there or your name, please feel free to do that. And so we'll have 4 postcards for each of us. You can use the same drawing. You can use 4 different drawings. We don't mind. It can be in black and white. It can be in color. Completely up to you. It can even be the infographic if that's what you prefer. But the idea is that we'll each have 4 postcards which we can hand out on our final presentation day. So you'll print out your 2 A4 pages of drawings and data. You will have your A1 community map. You will have your A6 postcards. What we'd like to do to share our work with one another across nations of Cambodia and Australia is upload a couple of quick snapshots of your work, so just screenshots, onto our Miro board. And you'll see here it says Assessment 1 Gallery. So how will our presentations work? They'll run for about 2 to 2.5 hours total. And as you can see in the image here, we will get all of you to do an old school pin-up. We won't be doing digital presentations. So we'll have a kind of mini exhibition at phase 1 of this course in Cambodia and in Sydney. And what we'll do is start each of the presentations with your community map that you've been working on as a team. So we'll have 3 minutes per team to introduce the key findings that have come from your community engagement exercises, to introduce the 5 themes that will be explored in your group, and to talk a little bit about your reflections on your team roles and dynamics. So putting aside the kind of street life study focus of this course, we're interested to understand how it has been working as a team with community members through this process. So that will be just 3 minutes per group. We then have 3 minutes per student to present on your particular street life study with your drawings pinned up on the wall. and then we'll have 3 minutes of feedback per student. So what do you as individuals talk to? First of all, you want to be introducing the pattern of street life that you've noticed and that you've studied. Second of all, the impact of this pattern on the community or the users, human, non-human, whatever they may be, is this. Remember, going back to those principles of lived streets. Is it that it creates belonging? Is it that creates interaction between strangers? Is it that it is about economic opportunity and familial relationships? Just kind of drawing out the social impacts of, and even environmental impacts of the street life focus. So the pattern, the impacts, the possible reasons behind that pattern. So that goes back to your ecosystem diagram. Why is this occurring? What are the factors, the cultural, social, political, economic, legal, environmental factors that might be causing this? And then finally, the principles or the lessons I can learn from this example for designing great lived or living community-led streets are this, this, and this. These are the principles that I would pass on. So 4 talking points here. It might be, a minute on the first 2, a minute on the second one, and a minute on the last one. And the staff will each spend time, of course, reading your cards so that we understand in a bit more depth the depth and breadth of your study. The final part of this assessment is a team evaluation. This is worth 5%, and we'll be doing this in assessment 1A, 1B, and 2. And so you'll be assessing the collaboration skills of your team members. And so you'll be doing quantitative feedback as well as qualitative feedback. And it's quite short. It will take you about 10 minutes, and I'll send the link to all of you. So let's wrap this all up. This assessment is really all about stories of socio-spatial street life. What stories are you telling? Not just spatial, not just social, the interrelationship between those. Why is your story important to tell? Does it actually lead to some lessons for how we can create great living streets? That's the ultimate goal. So what is the story? Why is it important to tell? And for this assessment, keep it simple and keep it focused. Good luck to everyone, and please reach out to us if you have questions.